A retired NASA flight specialist sat down in a recorded interview last spring and said something that, if you listen closely, unravels the entire official story about the Mars rover missions. He claimed that on at least 3 separate occasions, data packets from the surface of Mars were pulled from public release queues because they appeared to show biological activity. He named the instrument. He named the soul. He gave enough detail to make the agency's silence louder than anything he said. That is where our story begins. Not with little green men, not with a flying saucer photographed in a crater, with a soft-spoken engineer in his 70s, a legal pad full of notes, and a single claim that keeps gaining momentum, that the rovers may have found something alive, and that the people who saw it first may have decided we weren't ready to know. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what a Mars rover actually is. Curiosity, which landed in Gale Crater in 2012, carries an instrument called SAM, short for Sample Analysis at Mars. It heats soil and rock, then sniffs the vapors with a mass spectrometer. Perseverance, which touched down in Jezero Crater in February 2021, carries even more advanced hardware, including Sherlock and Pixel, tools built to hunt for the chemical fingerprints of past or present life. These are not cameras pointed at the sky. These are laboratories on wheels, each one costing billions, each one designed for exactly one job: find out if Mars ever hosted or still hosts living organisms. For years, the public answer has been measured. Interesting organics? Yes. Methane spikes? Yes. Seasonal patterns that hint at something dynamic under the surface? Yes. But life itself, a confirmed biosignature. The official position has always been that we are not there yet. We are still, according to the briefings, in the interesting chemistry phase. The retired specialist who spent decades inside the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena tells a different version. He says that in 2013, a SAM run produced a mass spectrum that several scientists on the internal review panel considered consistent with active metabolic processes. Not ancient residue, not contamination. Active. He says a smaller follow-up run was planned, then quietly descoped. He says the raw data was archived but never released in its original form. When other researchers later requested it through standard channels, they received processed summaries, which is not the same thing. Now, it is important to slow down here, because extraordinary claims deserve careful handling. One engineer's memory, even a well-placed engineer's memory, is not a confirmed discovery. Memories distort, interpretations drift, and every space agency on Earth has whistleblowers and former staff who see ghosts in their old work. So let's not sprint to a conclusion. Let's walk the evidence. The first piece of evidence is methane. Between 2013 and 2019, Curiosity repeatedly detected methane in the thin Martian atmosphere, sometimes in concentrations 10 times higher than baseline. On Earth, more than 90% of atmospheric methane comes from biological sources. On Mars, the source is still debated. Some researchers argue for purely geological explanations, like serpentinization deep in the crust. Others point out that the methane pulses are seasonal, and that they appear and vanish in ways that chemistry alone struggles to explain. NASA itself has called the fluctuations puzzling. The second piece of evidence is the Viking legacy. Back in 1976, the twin Viking landers ran an experiment called labeled release. The design was elegant. Drop a nutrient solution tagged with radioactive carbon onto Martian soil and see if anything metabolizes it and releases gas. The experiment produced a positive result. Gas came off the soil. Chemistry followed the curve you would expect from microbial activity. The principal investigator, Dr. Gilbert Levin, argued until his death in 2021 that Viking had in fact detected life, and that the agency had chosen a conservative interpretation because of a second experiment that failed to find organic molecules. Levin was not a fringe figure. He was the man who designed the test, and he went to his grave saying it worked. The third piece of evidence is the organic carbon. Both Curiosity and Perseverance have confirmed complex organic molecules in Martian rock, theophanies, benzene, chains of carbon atoms that on Earth are almost always associated with life, though they can be produced by non-living chemistry under the right conditions. Evidence suggests Mars had liquid water, stable temperatures, and a protective magnetic field for at least several 100 million years early in its history. That is a wide window, long enough for something to start. So where does the covered-it-up claim actually hold up, and where does it fall apart? It holds up, a little, on the matter of communication. Space agencies are, by institutional habit, cautious. A confirmed detection of extraterrestrial life would be the biggest announcement in the history of science. It would also be, in policy terms, a diplomatic event. Protocols exist. The Committee on Space Research published formal guidelines decades ago about how such a discovery should be announced, who should verify it, and in what sequence. Those protocols are not the same as a cover-up, but they do mean that any initial finding would go through layers of internal review before reaching the public. Layers mean delay. Delay, to an outside observer, can look like suppression. It falls apart, or at least weakens, when you consider the basic physics of leaking. Rover data is processed by hundreds of scientists at multiple institutions across several countries. Raw telemetry is shared with partners in Europe, Canada, and the UK. If a clear biosignature appeared in a data packet, keeping it quiet would require the coordinated silence of dozens of researchers, many of them ambitious, many of them in different legal jurisdictions. That is not how modern science works. Not anymore. The physics of secrecy breaks down under that kind of pressure. Not everyone is convinced by the retired specialist's account. Dr. Chris McKay, a planetary scientist who has spent his career thinking about Martian biology, has publicly argued that the agency's real problem is the opposite of a cover-up. He suggests that the scientific community is so afraid of repeating the Viking controversy, of claiming life and being wrong, that it now underreports ambiguous results. In that reading, the story is not suppression for public control. It is overcaution driven by professional fear. A different shape, same silence. Even so, the retired specialist's most specific claim deserves a hearing. He has described in public interviews and at least one conference appearance what he calls a wet sol. A day, early in Curiosity's mission, when a sample heated in SAM produced a vapor profile so unusual that the instrument operators flagged it for manual review. According to him, the subsequent analysis was informally titled among staff as the Sol 281 anomaly, though no such name appears in public mission logs. The run was, he says, reclassified and filed under calibration. The raw numbers went into the archive. The archive entry was later reorganized. When researchers outside the immediate team tried to pull the original packet, they found references, but not the packet itself. Is this proof of anything? No. It is the kind of story that would be very easy to invent and very difficult to confirm. It is also the kind of story that, if true, would not look any different from the outside than a simple administrative reshuffling of old files. That ambiguity is the point. It is what makes the claim sticky. There is also the question of perseverance and the sealed sample tubes. Since 2021, the rover has been collecting small rock cores and sealing them into titanium tubes. Some have been dropped at a site in Jezero crater called Three Forks, forming a backup depot. The plan once was a Mars sample return mission, in which a future lander would retrieve those tubes and ferry them back to Earth sometime in the 2030s. That plan has been repeatedly rescoped, delayed, and partially redesigned, partly over budget concerns, partly over engineering challenges. Skeptics of the agency's openness argue that the rescoping is suspicious. Supporters of the agency point out that sample return has always been fragile, that budget overruns are normal for missions of this scale, and that nothing about the delays indicates hidden knowledge. Both sides can point at the same calendar and see a different picture. Now connect this to a larger pattern. The search for life beyond Earth is not confined to Mars. The subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus are arguably more promising. The plumes of Enceladus, jetting out through cracks in its icy shell, contain organic molecules, salts, and hydrogen, the last of which on Earth feeds entire ecosystems in deep-sea vents. The James Webb Space Telescope has begun cataloging the atmospheres of distant worlds for gases that, in combination, would be hard to explain without biology. If there is life elsewhere in the solar system, Mars may not even be the first place we find it. That context matters. It suggests that the agency has many shots at a transformative announcement, not just one, and that sitting on a Martian finding would be strange when an Enceladus finding could arrive next decade and change the conversation anyway. And yet, something keeps pulling us back to the red planet. Maybe it is the romance of it. The way Mars sits in our night sky and has, for thousands of years, invited speculation. Maybe it is the persistence of the methane signal, the teasing seasonality of it. Maybe it is the memory of Viking, and the quiet, stubborn insistence of a few scientists who believe the first answer came back in 1976 and has been waiting on a shelf ever since. What can we say with confidence? We can say this. Conditions on early Mars appear to have been compatible with the emergence of simple life. Organic molecules have been confirmed in the rock record. Methane behaves in ways that at least one widely respected agency has publicly called hard to explain. Multiple rovers have carried instruments specifically designed to detect biology. Sample tubes now sit on the surface, waiting for a return mission that may or may not happen in any of our lifetimes. And at least one former insider insists that a key data packet, early in the Curiosity mission, was quietly rerouted away from public view. What we cannot say is that life on Mars has been confirmed, either openly or secretly. We do not have the original telemetry. We do not have the internal memos. We have one man's recollection, one decades-old positive result that most scientists treat as unresolved, and a collection of chemical anomalies that could go either way. It is worth saying plainly that this is the normal texture of the biggest scientific questions. They do not resolve in a single press conference. They unfold across decades, with findings that contradict each other, experiments that get rerun with slightly different equipment, and a slow narrowing of the possibility space. The story of DNA's double helix, for example, was not a clean, single discovery. It was a tangle of competing labs, rival interpretations, and data that meant different things to different teams until finally the picture clicked into place. The story of Mars biology, if there is one to be told, may follow the same path. Fragments now, arguments, and at some point, a moment when the fragments suddenly cohere. Consider also how the culture of disclosure has shifted. 50 years ago, agencies gave formal announcements and the public largely accepted them. Today, every mission scientist with a social media account is, effectively, a channel of their own. If a truly explosive finding were sitting in someone's desk drawer, the probability that some version of it would leak, even partially, even anonymously, is far higher than it used to be. The persistence of ambiguity around Mars, rather than an explosive leak, may itself be evidence that the data remains genuinely ambiguous. That is a frustrating place to stand. It is also, if you are honest about it, the truth of where we are. The broader implications are worth sitting with for a moment. If life, even microbial life, exists on Mars today, it means biology is not a one-time accident confined to a single blue planet. It means the universe is probably full of living worlds. It means everything we tell ourselves about how rare we are has to be rewritten. If, instead, Mars is dead and always has been, that too is a profound finding. Because it tells us that Earth-like starting conditions are not enough. Something else is needed. Some rare spark we do not yet understand. Either answer reshapes the future, and either answer deserves to be shared clearly with the people whose taxes and hopes funded the missions in the first place. So here is where the story rests for now. A retired engineer has made a specific claim. A small group of scientists believes he may be right. A much larger group of scientists believes the data is still ambiguous and that the agency is being prudent rather than deceptive. The rovers keep rolling. The sample tubes keep waiting. And somewhere in a server farm in California, there is allegedly a file that only a few dozen people have ever opened. Maybe it says nothing. Maybe it says everything. The broader context matters here too. Mars is not an isolated target. It is one node in a decades-long, multi-billion-dollar effort to answer a single question that humanity has asked since the first night it noticed the sky was full of lights. Are we alone? Every rover, every orbiter, every sample tube, every spectrometer is, in a sense, part of that one long question. The answer, when it comes, will not belong to a single agency or a single country. It will belong to everyone. And the institutions that handle the early stages of that answer know, probably better than anyone, that they are temporary custodians of something that ultimately cannot be contained. That awareness may be why the conversation has stayed as transparent as it has, or it may be why certain parts of it have not. Either reading is defensible. Reasonable people, looking at the same decades of mission data, reach different conclusions about what the agency knows and when it knew it. The conversation will keep going. The rovers will keep rolling. Another instrument will send back another ambiguous chemical fingerprint. Another former engineer will retire and tell a story. Somewhere, eventually, the threads will tie themselves together. What do you think happened in Gale Crater that day? Is this the kind of slow, careful disclosure that great science requires, or is it the kind of silence that eventually becomes its own confession? The answer may not arrive in a press conference. It may arrive in a data release, buried in a footnote years from now. When it does, someone will recognize it, and the quiet old engineer with the legal pad will either be vindicated or gently forgotten. There is one more layer to this story that does not usually get told, and it is worth pulling in now, because it changes the texture of the debate. The retired specialist who made the original claim is not the only former insider who has spoken up about ambiguous Martian findings. Over the past 15 years, a small but persistent chorus of former mission staff, contractors, and university-affiliated researchers have described similar patterns. Data that seem to hint at biology, internal discussions that seem to go quiet at the wrong moments, summaries that did not quite reflect the raw numbers they had seen. Most of these accounts are vague. Some are clearly colored by old grievances, disputes over authorship, or frustration at being pushed out of a team. A few are strikingly specific. When you line them up, side by side, they do not prove a cover-up, but they do suggest a culture in which certain findings get handled more carefully than others. Careful is not the same as concealed, but from the outside, the two can be difficult to distinguish. Consider also the rover's less discussed cousins. The European Space Agency's Trace Gas Orbiter, which entered Mars orbit in 2016, was specifically designed to characterize the methane anomaly. Its early findings complicated the picture in an unexpected way. Initial measurements reported far less methane in the upper atmosphere than surface readings from Curiosity would predict. That discrepancy has never been fully resolved. Some scientists argue that the methane is being destroyed close to the surface by some unknown process. Others argue that the detections themselves may have been overestimates. The honest answer, again, is that we do not know. And in that uncertainty, 1,000 interpretations grow. There is also a human dimension to this that often gets lost. The scientists who work on these missions, many of whom have devoted their entire careers to a single rover or a single instrument, are not bureaucrats. They are researchers who spent their 20s waiting for the data, their 30s analyzing it, and their 40s defending their conclusions at conferences. When the community reaches a consensus that is different from an individual's finding, that individual often retains their belief for the rest of their life. Gilbert Levin did. A handful of others have. Their dissent is not necessarily a cover-up. It is the normal friction of science. But to the public, and to a hungry internet, a lifelong dissenter can look very much like a whistleblower. And one last piece worth putting on the table. The agency itself has changed how it talks about Mars over the past decade. The language used in mission briefings has shifted, carefully, from searching for habitability to searching for signs of past life to, more recently, preparing for the possibility of biosignature detection. Each reformulation is a small step forward. Each is chosen with the kind of precision that suggests an institution preparing, over years, for an announcement that it cannot yet make. Whether that preparation is prudence in the face of possibility, or merely good communication strategy depends on which side of the question you start from. Until then, the red dot in our evening sky keeps its secret, and we keep asking.